To quote Principal Skinner, children, the times they are becoming quite different. But today we're talking about the album The Times They Are A-Changin, Jens, the third studio album by Mr. Bob Dylan. Opening thoughts, please.
I'm so excited to get into protest era, or maybe I should say supposedly protest era Dylan. Um, I don't know, this week as we were listening, I mean, at least I listened, I'm sure you listened too, but as we were, giving this album particular attention over other things that we were listening to, I was struck. I don't know. I think like growing up and like the historical narrative surrounding this album is that like this is the protest album. I mean, the Bob Dylan Bible says something like this is Bob's protest poetry. And while I tend to agree, I think we'll see contextually here, it isn't exclusively or only or maybe even at all a protest album. I think we'll get into that once the conversation continues to unfold. But I got some hot takes for you.
But I think you very early on have hit on something that this so-called protest era of Dylan is unfairly categorized because it also contains probably like his best love songs as well. And this album's kind of the perfect balance. I think it's almost 50-50 of love song to devastating protest song. I will read the pre-written bit just to give the album an introduction. Yeah.
Please.
So the Times They Are A-Changin is the third studio album by Bob Dylan. It was released on February 10th, 1964, which happens to be tomorrow. If you listen to this episode when it drops, it was released through Columbia Records. It was the first Dylan album to feature only original compositions. The album consists of stark, sparsely arranged ballads concerning issues such as racism, poverty, and social change, as well as some love songs, as we've said. The album peaked at number 20 on the US chart, eventually going gold, and belatedly reached number 4 in the UK in 1965. Um, so yeah, it's weird that took a while to reach. I wonder if it was it released late in the UK because sometimes that happens with albums, or was
Well,
it just a delay?
I think it was just a delay, but this is something that like isn't on my notes, but I'm kind of frustrated by it because it seems to hit every album, at least early in Dylan's career. But there's some like controversy over when this album was released. The Bob Dylan Bible, if you were to open up to the Times They Are Changing, they claim that this album was released January 13th, 1964, whereas everything else I could find online was February 10th, 1964,
Well,
as
that's
you
a
said.
French. It's a French book as well, the Bob Dylan Bible. So maybe it was released in France
It
later.
could it could be a thing of but I don't know. I feel like normally that kind of stuff is even called out like in the Wikipedia and the Britannica articles, for example. But this isn't the only album. I mean, you can look at John Wesley. I think you can look at Another Side. Like these albums have
Blonde
contested
on Blonde,
release dates.
famously.
Blonde on Blonde very famously. And I'm curious if that's like a thing of these dates not being well documented back then. That seems ludicrous or like not the exact answer. But like, do you have a rationale and explanation?
Well, maybe because if things come out today, they come out on all platforms equally. But maybe if like vinyls are shipping or something, it might be like different regions get it at different times, and therefore there's then like some kind of confusion as to what they
Maybe.
actually released.
Well, to get to the heart of your question about like uh wait, what was your question? Why the belated like release or sorry, the belated charting in the UK.
Yeah,
Something that's really interesting is this album was recorded between August 6th and October 31st of 1963. So a much shorter window than Freewheelin'. However, barely 4 months have passed even since the Freewheelin' sessions ended. So like if we recall from the last time we talked about a studio album, the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan came out in May of 63. And so by August and then October, he's already completed the next album. So if you think for a moment about living contextually in 1963, up until Freewheelin', Dylan is relatively unknown. Most people don't actually know who he is by name outside of people living in the village and the folk scene. So Freewheelin' comes out to massive critical success and acclaim. And so he's probably just starting to get some attention and notoriety on the airwaves beyond New York and in beyond the circle that knew him. But that doesn't happen instantly, especially in 1963. I mean, they don't have the internet, they don't have things going viral, at least not in the same way or in the same context. And so for an album like Times to already be coming out in February of 64, so not even a year after Freewheelin', I'm sure people are just starting to come on to who this dude even is. And so when the Times They Are A-Changin hits shelves in that February or January or whenever it came out in 1964, I think his fame and his name and who he is still on the up. I'm sure that there are parts of the country and then thus even parts of the world who are just starting to understand who he was. And so then it's possible, and I think maybe contextually that makes sense as to why these don't start to make at least airwave changes until 1965. Like, does that make sense? Perhaps is that maybe some of our older Dylanologists who listen? Is that what was your experience if you were there when these came out?
Well, yeah, I think, just the more famous you get, then the more likely people are to look into the back work, the backlog, aren't they? Like, so if in 65, especially, where he's internationally very, very famous, it would make sense that people might then go back to the albums they potentially missed. Also, interesting, before we get onto track list, we're obviously going to talk about this next time, but one of two albums from 1964 starting a run of Dylan kind of doing multiple albums in 1 year. We get that again in 65 and 70, and then 74, 75, 76. Not with studio albums, I'm talking about live albums as well. But like, to be a Dylan fan back then, we've not had anything since, well, we had Shadow Kingdom in, what was that, 23?
Hmm.
But that was obviously just, we'd already seen that in 21. So our last studio album, we're getting close to it being
6 years.
6 years,
Yeah,
which is, I think, well, Love and Theft to Modern Times, that was 2001 to 2006, that's 5 years. I think this is the longest we've been without a studio album, if you don't count Shadow Kingdom, I think.
I think
Um,
yeah,
or
that
maybe, wait, World Gone Wrong to, no, that's only 4 years. No, yeah, so yeah, I think it is the longest, which is, I texted you the other day saying I don't think we're going to get a new studio album. You're incredibly optimistic all the time because I don't know, somehow still optimistic despite being American. But I would be amazed if we get a studio album. But yeah,
I
it's cool that you get two in 1 year.
it is, and I think not that that necessarily says anything, but to sort of double tap for a second on the context of his rise to fame. It is, we take for granted, like, we're people living 60 odd years removed from the actual happenings, but like we contextually forget how quick things were happening for Dylan during this period. I mean, the dude was fucking prolific from 63 to 66. What that dude was able to do with Freewheelin', Times, Another Side, Bringing It All Back Home, Highway, and then Blonde on Blonde, and then to just disappear off the face of the earth again.
And
This dude,
arguably be more prolific whilst he's disappeared as well with what happens in Big Pink.
well, I mean that too, but it's like people are just starting to get a hold of like who this guy is, like just by and large, and he's already changed from like folky to protest folk to electric folk rock to thin wild Mercury sound, and then just disappears. Like this dude, I'm so excited to start getting into these couple of albums. But to again to talk about the context, just very briefly surrounding this album, we've got Live at Carnegie Hall, which is a pretty important show recorded on October 26th, 1963. So this is as he's finishing Times in the studio. A month later, on November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, which was I mean, watershed moment for anybody that was alive during the time. I mean, think of things like 9/11. If you were alive for that, I know we were, but perhaps some of our listeners weren't. And then just 3 weeks to the day after Kennedy's assassination, the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee gave Dylan their annual Tom Paine Award for his contribution to the civil rights movement. This skinny little white Jewish kid from Minnesota, now living in New York as this, like,
Well,
growing folk star.
isn't that when he stood up and said that he saw himself in Lee Harvey Oswald and did like
He was
quite a
very
drunk and
drunk. He was very drunk.
yeah, did and like pissed quite a lot of people off, which is very Dylan of him, and started to reject the notion of being a protest singer, which is then really funny that he then releases The Times They Are Changing, which is um just unbelievably protesty, if that's a word. I think before we get into the actual songs, I want to just talk about his voice because we've spoken about that a lot on the last two episodes. And the debut album, there was a lot of different singing styles. As we said, we think he's trying to find the voice. Then the freewheeling, there's less of it, but there is still some of it. We spoke about kind of Honey, Just Allow Me One More Chance, or Bob Dylan's Dream. Times Are Changing is one. This is the Bob Dylan voice. This is the folk Bob Dylan voice. It's he's not trying any different vocal techniques here. It's the same. the entire way through. And this album seems to have a real identity about it. Not that Freewheeling doesn't necessarily, but this to me is kind of the album where Bob Dylan like arrives as it was because it's the one singing style, everything's written by him, and the album seems to have these very, very clear points to make. Whereas Freewheeling, with having a couple of covers, still seems to me, and this isn't a slate on Freewheeling at all, but what I mean is it's still a young man who's trying to get to grips with what he is as a recording artist. Whereas Times Are A-Changin, this seems to be Bob Dylan kind of putting himself bare and going, this is who I am and this is what kind of artist I'm going to be. Hilariously, the following year completely changed. But
Not only that, but we'll get to it, but the last song already seems to be his metaphorical
well, yeah,
goodbye. So
exactly,
let's
yeah.
let's talk about these songs though. What do you want to say to start with the songs?
Um, well, should we just go through? I mean, I think
Yeah.
so. I think something interesting about Times Are Changing. When I ages ago on like one of the old Dylan accounts I had, I put out a thing of like, no, I think maybe we did it actually on the first podcast about how people found Dylan, and so many people said the opening credits of Watchmen when
Hmm.
the Times They Are Changing plays over the old Minutemen getting killed. And I remember hearing that in the cinema, and obviously I was already a Dylan fan, and it being one of the first times I'd heard Dylan in like the wild, as it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was so excited because also it fits that scene so well.
Hmm.
I do think this isn't necessarily talk about the song itself, but in A Complete Unknown when he goes to Newport 64, which annoyed me because it's
Yeah.
not 64, and he sings The Times Are Changing if it's a new song, which again annoyed me because it was already out, and the whole crowd sings along with him. I thought that was a bit of a corny scene. I like the film, but I thought it was a bit of a corny scene.
Yeah.
um, but outside of that, I mean, I mean, this is what we said about "Blowing in the Wind" last week. What are we going to say about The Times That Are Changing that hasn't already been said?
Yeah, and nothing specifically except just some thoughts that I had. So I already kind of want to challenge some of these assumptions in the first song. I'm specifically wondering, we've already alluded to the fact that in 63 Freewheelin' comes out, and because I wasn't there, and I feel like most of the biographies I've ever read, and so anything that I've actually ever like heard of this time, they don't necessarily specifically talk about the experience of the fan, like the actual person who would have been hearing Dylan, because that's what you and I are, right? We're not music critics, we're not working in the music industry, we're not touring like Dylan and his friends. But what was it like to live in 63 and then obviously 1964 as this album comes out? And like what do you make of Dylan? So I'm just thinking of the average fan. You might be somebody who would have had to go to your local record store to actually physically pick it up. We know that Dylan really wasn't an artist that was played over the airwaves. So if you were just a casual music fan, you probably weren't even hearing Bob Dylan, right? Like his songs would only peak at like 35, maybe 22. Like they didn't get very high. And so most people were probably in this time, at this point, hearing the Beatles. The Beatles and the Beach Boys were probably what most Americans, at least, I don't know about on your side of the pond, but like here, the Beatles and the Beach Boys would have been the thing that most people knew. And so think of like their style in that time and what they looked like, put together in suits and all trim and proper. And so for Dylan, do you think people saw him as a protest singer? Do you think they saw him as a folk singer? Like what would have been the visual for who Dylan was? And so it's interesting to consider the context that I gave regarding JFK being assassinated. You have heated political tension all over with war, with the civil rights movement. We talked about when we talked about freewheeling, Dylan having done the March on Washington. So how did the general public or the masses view Bob Dylan, if he was even viewed at all? Obviously, like those who knew him had an image of who they were. But what do you think about like contextually in its time and place? Like, do you think that the general audience understood even the significance of this? Like, do you think Times was instantly recognized by a general common person? I'm trying to like step away from the narrative, the normal narrative that we know and that we've heard is what I'm trying to say. Like, what would it have been like to be just a guy on the streets in 1964 and to hear the times they are changing? Like, do you think you were struck given the context of the world at large?
I think a lot of the posters and reviews did lead into the fact that he was a protest singer. And if you look at the back of like Freewheeling, it kind of mentions that as well in the liner notes. So I think if people who found Bob Dylan must have been aware. And I think given that it's folk music, which has always been political, and he is kind of sharing the same stage as Joan and Pete Seeger, and is very clearly influenced by Woody. I have to imagine the average person would be aware somewhat that it's going to be political. I also don't think you can hear a song "The Times Are a Change," like a song like "The Times They Are A-Changin," and not realize it's because Dylan himself said he wrote it really quickly, and it seems to be very. It's a really good song. I do really like this song, but it's not like there's not some hidden meaning to it. If you know what I mean, it's quite for a Dylan song, it's quite out there in terms of like "Blowing in the Wind." It still has the kind of the answer my friend's blowing in the wind still has like a little bit of mystery to it. Whereas times are changing. Lines like "Mothers and fathers across the land don't criticize what you can't understand," etc. It's very blunt for Dylan, and I think even if you didn't know who this guy was, listening to that song as the opening of this album, I do think tells you a lot about what you need to know about him, and that this is a guy who's capturing angst, capturing kind of youthful kind of disruption and upset with the system, and is going to kind of try and address it. I'm not sure he's like offering particularly many answers, but there's just a real anger behind it, as I think there should be in protest music, as we're seeing currently.
Well, that was another thought is like this song, though it was so it was written in 63, recorded in 63, released in early 64, and we need this song maybe now more than ever. When I think about things going on like in Minnesota, for example, or like yesterday, I was at a protest myself. Like this
It's like all
as
of
as
all of the
much as
stuff we've
stuff,
been saying about
right?
like Masters of War and stuff, like it's just depressingly relevant.
Like the more that things change, the more that they stay the same. We still need these songs, and I think that's perhaps what frustrated me, and that's what Bear's saying is that the times were changing. I think in some sense the times are changing, yes, today, but the more that they remain ever ever relevant. And so it's what is it about living that we can't seem to get past the need for societal change? Why haven't we reached the utopian world that we want?
I think it'll be a funny game to play as we go through this album. Of let's just at the end talking about each song, just ask if it's still relevant. 62 years later, and I think it's going to be depressing how many answers are yes.
Ugh,
Um,
God.
Speaking of relevance, let's high cost of living, people struggling to make ends meet. Ballad of Hollis Brown, a song in which obviously everyone listening will know the song, but just to sum it up, there's a farmer who's basically being run out of business, can't afford to operate anymore, so kills his kids, his wife, and then himself with a shotgun. Really, really happy song. Um, Weirdly, I will say actually, there's a version on that Dylan and the band did in '74 with like this really kind of jangly, fast-paced guitar, which is almost and it's like really stomping. It's almost happy, and it's my favorite. It's probably my favorite song off the 1974 box set. Um, which is really funny because it's such a fucking horrible song. Like it's a good song, but I'll like the story is really horrible.
Well,
It
that's
influenced this song called "Frankie Teardrop" by Suicide, which is one of the scariest songs I've ever heard in my life. Like if people haven't heard that, I'm not going to recommend going to listen to it because it's really horrible. But it's influenced by this, in which a guy kind of kills his family as well. But yeah, again, it's a really really good song. It's a really poignant song. It's really kind of hits you really really hard at the end. But it's not exactly a nice listen, is it?
no, but this is what I mean, dude. I'm trying to think as a casual fan who would have encountered this in the wild in real time. I mean, these are the people that helped make Dylan who he is. So it's like to pay honor and respect to those who like went to a record store and picked this up and put it on their turntable and like imagine actually sitting down to listen. I know a lot of people these days, we're so passively listening because we're doing a thousand other things, but to sit down in front of your turntable and to hear a ballad of Hollis Brown for the first time, like it must have been fucking like devastating.
But that, I mean, this is an obvious point, but that is what sets him apart, isn't it? You compare him
Yeah.
to the Beatles in '64, and I like the Beatles obviously, but like they're not doing shit like this yet. And so you do have this weird voiced folk singer who also that's still the folk tradition. Dylan's not doing anything like completely revolutionary here. Folk music and blues music especially has always been, these kind of tales of human tragedy and trying to kind of fix the wrongs or at least try and learn something from them. So this isn't this isn't something completely new, but Dylan is a more popular artist who is bringing that form to more people, and he's also showing off his writing chops as well. As you know,
Hmm.
again, when he's writing this, he's 22 years old, and we say this every week, but he sounds like he's in his 60s or 70s, having lived a really long life and heard these stories kind of firsthand instead of making them up. And I don't think this is inspired by directly true events, but it's obviously inspired by a feeling at the time and genuine struggles people were going with. And so, yeah, if to use your example of someone going and listening to it, this is the kind of thing that makes you sit up and listen it closely and go, "Who the fuck is this guy?" And I need to start listening to him, basically.
And dude, to your point, this is a terrifying song, and weirdly, and I think that's part of how this, like, why this song works so well, and other songs like it. But like, this is my favorite song on the album, I think, and that's like bold of me to say, and that has not been an opinion I've held until this time through. So maybe it's because of the world that I'm living in, and as we've said, like, is still contextually relevant. But I identified more with this song this time around than any of these other ones, and I do think that perhaps this is why Seven Curses was left off the album. I love Seven Curses, don't get me wrong, but like, I don't know if you can have a song like Ballad of Hollis Brown, which uses the number seven repeatedly as well, and then have another song called Seven Curses. Like, they feel like they're in a similar vein, and I'm actually glad that this is the song that won out over Seven Curses, for example. I don't know if you agree.
Well, it's the same with Percy's song as well. I think having not that similar, but the end of that story is also death. Having too many repetitions of that on the album would make this album, which is already quite dark, a lot darker. I will say though, I prefer Percy's song to Ballad of Hollis Brown, so
Hmm.
I would have almost preferred that on there. Although it's funny you say Hollis Brown's your favorite song because my favorite song later on is also a really depressing song.
Uh,
So we both like sad songs
yeah,
from the
and
album,
just
which is pretty funny.
it is funny, and I think this is something that we said last time as well, that it just is abundantly apparent on this particular track. Like, Dylan's guitar playing, like, never mind the song and what it's about, like, his style, the way he's playing, and just the driving rhythm of it. I mean, this is one dude singing and playing guitar and some harmonica as well, all by himself, but you could almost think that there were like 10 people behind him. It's that, like, musically robust.
There's an amazing version which you can find on YouTube. It's called 1963 Bob Dylan Performs Ballad of Hollis Brown on TV. But anyway, he's backed by a banjo. It's Dylan on the guitar and then this unknown person playing banjo. Well, I'm sure you can find out. Unknown as an I don't know who it is, rather. And with the banjo is like this driving force behind it. It's a really, really amazing version. We'll post it to the Instagram or Substack or something, but it's a really, really good version.
Cool.
Um, okay, track three with God on Our Side. So this is my least favorite song on the album, not just because it mentions God. Um, just I've always like sometimes I go through each album and think like, what's my favorite song and what's my least favorite song? And the only reason this is my least favorite is if I had to not listen to one song on the album, this is the one I would choose to skip. When
Same.
listening to the album, I don't skip it. It's a bit repetitive. Also, Tick is still relevant. Still God in whichever religion you believe in, still being scapegoated. Jens knows all about that. He's a big fan.
Big fan.
Um, See, mate, I think I'm a Hellenist. I'm just gonna. I just like the Greek gods. So no one's using them to. I mean, pretty bad at the time, but no one's using them to to justify war crimes these days. But yeah, no,
I
I
mean,
think the song's good though. Not
I
gonna.
mean, yeah, it's a Dylan song. I just, we'll get on to outtakes in a little bit, but when you consider it a list of outtakes, like, I almost think that this could have been left off the album. Again, I think it's the weakest song, and it's not to, again, not to say that it's a bad song. It just, it does not have the same, I don't know, power or kick or potency that some of these other ones have. I mean, we'll talk
It's a bit
about one, two,
obvious.
yeah, a little bit. And maybe that's fine. It works. Again, I don't want to just like shit on these songs and have people think that we hate them or anything. I mean, there is value here. And I mean, I identify with lines like, um my name it is nothing, my agent means less, or he chooses to close the song near the end with, being weary as hell. And I think that's shit that we can identify with today. I mean, like, with all the fucking crazy nonsense that goes on a daily basis, it does sometimes feel like, my name, it is nothing. Like in the grand scheme of things, I am just like this blip on a map, right? In this vast universe in time and space. But that's not like necessarily where you end. That's not like not actually true that your name is nothing and your age it means less. Like you are a person. You have value. You matter. And I think we realize that, but in the end, we're just like weary as hell because we can't escape the chaos of the world.
I think importantly, let's put it in context as we keep trying to do. So
Yeah.
the Beach Boys, God only knows, got banned from the radio for a while because people thought it was blasphemous because it invoked the name of God. Even though you live in a country that's still incredibly Christian and I live in a country that's fortunately incredibly secular, back in '64, I'm sure it would have still been quite controversial to mention God in a way that isn't like Dylan's not saying anything bad about the idea of a God here, but he's calling into question obviously the people who use God as a justification for what they're doing. And I have to imagine that was somewhat controversial, at least edgy. And again, this 22-year-old invoking that still has to have been seen, I imagine, as being interesting. And like we're looking at it through a lens of it's like when I said the song's almost obvious, it's just because we kind of maybe live in an age where we do look back and go, we are like the Nazis were part of the Catholic Church, or the Russians made the state atheist. Yeah, we look back and we kind of see how God has been used pro and against, but maybe in the thick of it, Dylan writing this would have hit home a lot more than it does 62 years later, or even when we first listened to it like 20 odd years ago. Maybe it'd hit more if you were there at the time and going, "Oh yeah, fuck, everyone is using religion." That's a good point because we now look back and go, "Well, that's obvious. Everyone's using religion to justify what they're doing." But again, contextually, it might be different. Maybe if someone was there at the time who's listening, could tell us.
Maybe. And you know what always makes me laugh? I think we've talked about this somewhere else before. Like the people who are Dylan fans that are like in conservative circles. Like I don't know how you can be a Republican and hear anything that Dylan is saying and like walk away without immense dissonance. And this does feel like that kind of song because to your point, a casual Christian, Catholic, Lutheran, Protestant, whatever, living in this time, they would have immediately perked up at the use of God, and especially not being used in a explicitly reverent manner. Like normally worship songs are like paying honor and homage to their deity, and in this case it's not doing that. It's using it in a way that isn't irreverent necessarily, but on the surface it's not like praise and worship. This is like you're saying, poking at hypocrisy.
It was also a song Dylan seemed to like a lot because he played it a hell of a lot during that period. He played it with Joan a lot of the time as well. Um, and like I say, it's a good song. He doesn't play it much later on in his career. Um, so I don't know if it kind of means less to him potentially.
Did he play it during the
Um,
Christian period much? I genuinely don't know.
um, why don't you vamp for like a couple
i
of
can
seconds and I'll
i
give
can
the answer.
I can actually do that because I'm noticing here when we look at the breakdown of these songs and when they're recorded, uh, August 7th was a pretty busy day for him. So Ballad of Hollis Brown, With God on Our Side, and we'll get to these songs in a second, Only a Pawn in Their Game, and Boots of Spanish Leather, all of which are recorded August 7th, which was the second day of recording in 1963. So it's interesting to look at even that breakdown and see what Dylan did and what he stuck with, and what didn't get lopped off, because he does go back to the studio in October and record some of these other songs like Times, like One Too Many Mornings, and then When the Ship Comes In, and Hattie Carroll. Um, but did you find an answer about
Yeah.
playing in the Christian era?
So he's only played it live 29 times actually. I thought he played it more during the early 60s, but he played a lot of kind of like Newport. He played at the March on Washington. He played at Carnegie Hall. Um, he then between 65 and 75, he played it once on the Rolling Thunder Review apparently, and then he picked it back up in 84. So no,
So
he
no.
completely skipped the Christian era. Played it a bit in 88, then 94, then his last time was in 95. Oh, 94 actually. That's it's on MTV Unplugged.
Oh, yeah,
There's a
yeah.
version on there which is actually quite good. Again, I do like the song, but I do think the MTV version is quite good. Yeah, then he played it in 1995, and that was the last time he ever played it. So
We were
um,
both born, but I bet a lot of people that listen to the pod were not born the last time he played it.
I oh no, I hope that's not true. I don't know why. I hope everyone's older than I am. Just just to make me feel better. Okay, so I think this next song's one of the most beautiful songs Bob Dylan's ever written and recorded.
Absolutely. It's one of the best songs
Uh,
ever, period, in my book. I'm just a
yeah, so
lonely guy here.
One Too Many Mornings is the name of the song, track four. Also, one of the songs that drew the biggest amount of hate and boos on the 66 tour, because it was one that Dylan had actually taken from an acoustic setting along with Baby Let Me Follow You Down and turned it into an electric song. And it's one of those songs where I'm not even sure which version I prefer. Like, it depends on my mood, obviously. I love Rick harmonizing with Dylan on the 60s, 65, 66 version and how it takes on this whole new meaning. But the version we're talking about here, again, to your point, guitar playing, amazing. Presumably written for Suze, as all these songs were, because she'd gone to Italy to study and then had decided to stay even longer, causing Dylan to unfortunately have an affair, which is, bloody hell, Suze, why are you staying in Italy? Dylan can't keep it in his pants. But we get songs like this out of it, so great for me. But yeah, One Too Many More is just a phenomenal song.
Agreed. And to your earlier point about it sort of being one of the first songs to mark a transition in use, meaning like it didn't stay in its purely original style of being Dylan and a guitar. It has this evolution, this adaptation. And so it's interesting to think that this is one of those songs that early on Dylan even recognized and resonated with and has carried through all the iterative styles. And I think that that's obviously a hallmark of Dylan of playing songs that differ from their original style. But I like that this is one of the first to do that.
So I did a reel ages ago. I think I've still got it on my phone, so we might be able to post it. That I use this as like a benchmark of where Dylan is in his career, this song, because I think this might be the song that's gone through the most stylistic changes. So you've got the 66 electric, he records it with Johnny Cash, in
Oh, I
that
love
video
that
when they're both
version.
chewing gum, yeah.
Yeah.
That's in 69. Then live in 69, he plays it at the Isle of Wight with the band, and it's a very Nashville version. He played it in 74 with the band, and it's a very stadium shouty version. 76, he plays it, it's on Hard Rain. 78, he did it once. Someone in the audience was holding a sign that said One Too Many Mornings, and they played it once. And so the quality is terrible, but it's a ballad Budokan grand version. And then it goes acoustic in the 80s, and then he played at the Supper Club. He's played it like way more recently, like in the late 2010s. Like this song is clearly Dylan knows its worth, and also it seems to follow him, kind of like how Tangled Up in Blue did as well. Like if you look at any year, it's likely Dylan has played One Too Many Mornings up until about 2017 or something, and it just constantly evolves. He constantly drags it with him. It's such a timeless song, and
It's so
it's kind
good.
of the perfect song. Like the imagery that he creates, when the dogs will lose their bark, etc. Like those opening lines, and it's just three short verses, and he creates this incredible sense of longing, and it's up there for me with like Tomorrow Is a Long Time of these kind of incredibly evocative romantic poems.
Well, it's funny that you say that. So when we had the old iteration of the podcast and we did an episode called What is Bob Dylan's Masterpiece? And we thought about like what'll be his enduring legacy or like which song will be like codified in the annals of history or something. Like we didn't I don't even know if we mentioned this. Like we touched on Tomorrow Was a Long Time, I think. We talked about like a Rolling Stone and Blowing in the Wind, which I think are also that, but it I don't know. I wish that this song got talked about more because obviously Dylan, like you said, sees its value, obviously loves it, wants to keep playing it. Whereas other songs that you would think have more of a life in Dylan's live repertoire, they just don't. I mean, there are some songs that have never been played, which perhaps would be a fun episode to talk about someday. Um, but I don't know, like what else can you say about this? This is so just beautiful and striking. And I think I don't know, especially when you juxtapose it to North Country Blues, which isn't a bad song, but just the juxtaposition is there.
Oh, just one last thing on One Too Many Mornings. I think like
Yeah,
we said last week about Bob Dylan's Blues or Dream, whichever the good one is.
yeah.
Fucking forget.
Dream, Dream.
Dream. Okay, yeah. So this is kind of occupies the same space for me of like a song I almost take for granted. And you almost like I never forget about One Too Many Mornings because I know it's amazing, but also I hear so many different iterations of it because of how often it's played that you kind of almost forget. Sometimes when I just hear the original, I'm just struck of like, oh, this is kind of perfect. And we said at the top, as much as this is a Dylan protest album, it also has these incredibly tender, gentle songs, which show that he's not just this angry young man who's writing kind of reactionary stuff to what's like happening around him. He's also human who's going through human emotions and of longing and love and loss, etc. And he's just as capable, if not more capable, of getting that down on paper as he is the stuff he's actually becoming more known for. However, North Country Blues, looking, uh, you've said before, I think when we did the outtakes episode on the old podcast, that this is a song you'd replace with a different outtake. I can't remember which one it was though. I fucking love this song, man. I think this song's so good because, and I'll tell you why, because Dylan's writing it from female perspective, which is just interesting in and of
And I
itself.
love that's so cool.
I think the story is devastating. Similar to kind of Ballad of Hollis Brown, kind of still like people in the Dust Belt struggling to survive, and again still looking at the world around you and trying to and creating these like narratives to get your point home. Um, but I love the really, really simple guitar of just um it's like the dropped E string, then twice strum, then dropped A string, twice strum. And that's like really, really effective. It's just it feels like you kind of sat around a campfire with someone telling you this story. Um and it's just I don't know, it's just it sets such a mood for me. And it's just again, it's this he paints this world where you end up feeling really, really sorry for this woman who isn't a woman. It's Bob Dylan telling you about this made up woman. But it just really draws you in. It just seems to be like folk storytelling at its best, as far as I'm concerned. And you seem to have changed your mind on it, but actually,
Hell yeah, yeah, yeah. This time around again. I think maybe this is just me. Maybe other people don't experience this, but because of how I was, I don't know, like conditioned into the Dylan fandom or like what you read, that sort of starts to inform your narrative almost more than just how you experienced the music, if that makes sense. And so I'm trying to separate myself from even what I know and love about Dylan and just listen to the songs without distraction, without pretext, and just hear them in their terms. And this time around, again, hearing North Country Blues was jarring. It's you almost think like, how is this not a real song? Like, how could somebody write something like this and have it just be? I mean, it is a story, but stories have meanings. There's something that the artist is trying to communicate, and I like that this was recorded on the very first day of the recording session. So obviously, even Bob recognized like, I do really like this song. This is important. This needs to stay here. And so I even dislike that I have said like this should be the one that gets lopped off because it's the only one from the first day that Bob chose to keep.
he'd also played it at Newport '63. So I think when he went into, there's like a really good shot of him, a really good the footage of him playing it is him sat in the day with everyone sat around him. And again, we spoke about this last week, 2 weeks ago now, of the weekend Dylan became Dylan, and this seems to be a cornerstone of that. And so I think he knew the power of this song going into recording it because he'd seen the actual live reception it had got. I'm glad that you kind of not that you've changed your mind on the album because when we spoke about the album before, I've always said this is a top 10 Dylan album for me easily. This is my favorite of the folk albums by a mile. I kind of think it's a perfect album, and you not that you've necessarily turned your nose up at that, but you've kind of always been a little bit kind of a little bit wary of it. But you seem to have really enjoyed it this week, which makes me happy.
Yeah, again, I think it is a perspective shift, and I think that that's something that even outside of our love for Dylan, our love for music even is not getting entrenched in mindsets or beliefs and just thinking that you have to stay there, if that even makes sense. Like again, I because of how I came into Dylan and his catalog and sort of the narrative that built in my mind, like over the years, I, I told myself that like the folk era, the acoustic era, like because I listened to it so much that it was, I don't know, somehow like I was over it or I didn't need to listen to it or it bored me for a while. And I hate that that's even true. But what I'm trying to say is like I've changed my mind. I've realized that like, oh yeah, like I can think about this album and these songs in a new way. I don't have to keep my old mindset. And I think this song, Ballad of Hollis Brown, are definitely indicative of that. Because I knew One Too Many Mornings and Boots of Spanish Leather and Restless Farewell were some of my favorite songs. But when I would think about the album as a whole, it just wasn't one that I wanted to listen to. But now, after this week, I find myself wanting to listen to it.
Also, should we do a tick for depressingly still relevant as well for this song as well? So that's fun for everyone. Okay, so that's the end of side one. So five songs on side one, five songs on side two. So you've just had quite a depressing side. Take out One Too Many Mornings. That's perked you up, but North Country Blues just brought you right back down, and then we're straight back into the headlines with only a pawn in their game. Should we just give it an early tick for relevancy? And again, this was played at March on Washington. Um, so people who don't know, again, I imagine people do know that Medgravers was killed, and then so he was a black man killed in a racial attack. But then Dylan's singing about how the shooter was actually kind of being used, obviously a pawn in their game, a piece that's being used in a wider thing. Think of think of what's happening currently in Minnesota, as Jen said. Um, but I think for me, this song it's good. I don't know. It's like I kind of feel about almost similar to how I feel about With God on Our Side, in that it's not one I'd necessarily be that excited about listening to. Do you know what I mean? Like With God on Our Side, it's very obvious, it's very on the nose. They both have very incredibly important messages, but just as a fan of just so like it's a fan of music and what I want to listen to, only porn in their game isn't something that I immediately go, oh fuck, I can't wait to listen to that one. Which is going to be odds for the song I'm going to talk about later, and which are songs I do actually want to kind of seek out. Um, but I think this one it's a really really good song. I'm not saying it's not. It's a really important message, but it's not my favorite song on the album.
And that's fine. That yeah, I mean, justified. It's also not my favorite, but it is one that when I was a Dylan fan early on, I for some reason identified with or I found interesting because this was probably the song that I played, I don't know, second or third most. But yeah, I don't know
That's
what one
depressing.
it is kind of depressing. And it's funny because I was like 12, 13, 14 years old listening to these Dylan songs. Like my early Dylan days were the hardcore folk and protest days. And so like it took me a while before I in like the early 2000s realized that there was like electric Dylan and then Rolling
Then you
Thunder
stopped,
Dylan.
didn't you? Then
I
you
did
looked
I
at
did
Electric Dylan and stop.
I mean, I didn't stop it like exclusively. I listened to the rest, but I didn't quite like it. And that's like again, imagine being a 13-year-old though and listening to Christian Dylan and 80s Dylan and just being like, what can I identify with here? Like this isn't the music that I like. And as my days have gone on and as I've aged, I've obviously changed my mind and come to realize and appreciate and understand Dylan more holistically. But I'm curious how many people, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is like I'm curious how many people out there, obviously many, had a hard time like when Dylan goes electric. Because like when this is what you latch onto, when this is the first thing that you hear, when this becomes the person that you like and revere and maybe even idolize, when they change, you especially in a way I guess that you don't like, I guess I can understand perhaps why so many people could have been upset when Dylan sold out and went electric.
There's a really interesting comparison I'm going to make here, which is this song appeared on a covers album by another artist who has changed, but I would say for the worst for all the like for I hate it's an artist I grew up absolutely loving and means to people in my area means a hell of a lot. And then he changed and is now quite a horrible racist bigot. So it's Morrissey from the
Oh,
Smiths.
right, right, right.
And like you, I don't know like if you've got anyone local to you like this, but like you cannot underestimate in Manchester how important Morrissey is. Um, and he's like the Gallagher brothers, except I hate the Gallagher brothers. So Morrissey's like far more important. Um, but yeah, he did a cover song and he included Only Pawn in their game on it, which is really interesting because he seems to entirely miss the point that Morrissey's now unbelievably racist and like really, really bigoted, and then chooses a song in which basically he's singing about how he himself is being used by a system to kind of perpetuate racism. So it's an incredible lack of self-awareness. And, Morrissey's never been one to really be that self-aware, to be honest with you. But, he wasn't always a complete cunt, but now he is. And anyway, don't listen to his cover because it's terrible. Um, but you should listen to the version that Dylan and Pete Seeger performed in at McGee's Farm, which is
Hmm.
quite a famous bit of footage, and also potentially was the influence for Maggie's Farm as well. McGee's Farm, Maggie's Farm. I've
Yeah,
heard that
yeah,
theorized.
I have as well. That's again some of the story, the narrative that you hear just growing up with Dylan. And I think a narrative that I want to challenge is that is this actually a protest album or is this a breakup album? And I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek, but this time around, when I listened to it and when you just look at the track listing, it's almost like one could see this as like a meta breakup album with songs like the Times They Are A-Changin. Obviously there are the on the nose like One Too Many Mornings and Boots of Spanish Leather and Restless Farewell. But some of the themes, some of the undertones, well, work in a protest context and can be used as such given the times that were happening surrounding the release of this album. I could also interpret a lot of these songs as being breakup songs and to use only a pawn in their game. I mean, that is about a real event and things that did transpire, but we also know that Dylan takes those and uses them for different meanings and purposes. I'm curious, like, do you think this is half protest album, half breakup album, or is it all breakup album? Like, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I've read about Only Pawn in the Game as well is from a meta point of view, it could be Dylan also talking about himself as him. He started to see himself being used by the protest movement as well as being kind of their messiah, and maybe understanding that kind of what happens in a complete unknown as well. He realizes he might be being used for the wrong reasons and not necessarily what he wants. I mean, I do think there are at least a couple of songs I do think are just outwardly protesty, and maybe protesty is not even the right word. That's something we're putting onto Dylan. They're at least topical, let's say, and
Yeah.
he has something to say about them. I think we're kind of almost doing exactly what he hated in the '60s, which caused him to have such a backlash against it. Which is he might not necessarily be protesting what's happening, but he's just talking about what's happening, and he's coming at it from a specific point of view. And when he appears at stuff like the March on Washington plays with God on our side, early point in the game, and when the ship comes in, he's making a very stark point that he agrees with the civil rights movement, which is a good thing to agree with. Um, but then we're not necessarily. He's not necessarily standing there with a placard saying everything I'm singing about is bad. Sometimes I think he might just be kind of searching the newspapers and finding stories that interest him and stories that he does have an opinion on, but he's just writing songs about them to either get the word out there or to get his point across. But protesting, I think, comes with this connotation that he's then doing something about it, which I don't necessarily think he is. I think he's just contributing to the conversation and using it as a jumping off point. Like later on in his career, he starts using kind of the Odyssey to start writing songs. He and the Blood on the Tracks era, he was using obviously the divorce with Sarah, but also his new painting technique was also informing how he was structuring songs. So I think he's always someone who, people would call him like a plagiarist, I guess, later in his career, which I don't necessarily agree with, but he's someone who takes inspiration from stuff. And at that time, much like now, really, you couldn't move for shit going on. Like there is so much stuff to talk about, and especially if you're a young person with opinions, there is a hell of a lot that you can write about. But this idea that you're then using it as some call of action, I could see as him kind of going against that and saying, no, I'm not necessarily like protesting it. I'm just raising it and writing about it because it makes for good songwriting. And at the end of the day, he's a poet, he's an artist who I part of me just thinks he looks around and goes, "That's an interesting thing to write a song about." Secondary as well, I think it's bad or I think it's good. But it seems unfair to kind of just say he's a protest singer. Yeah,
And that's, I think, the most eloquent way I've ever heard anybody put it. Like, I'm not trying to like pump you up or anything. I'm literally just like,
it's the British accent, man. I could say anything and it just sounds
no.
like it's all right.
No, but like the way that you articulated that in terms of like how you think about Dylan's career, I think is exactly correct. And so I can see why Dylan gets frustrated by the narratives that are sort of put on him by people, even just who are totally well intentioned, trying to understand and contextualize the person that they're listening to and that they like. Um, but yeah, that was good. I guess I don't have much else to say on Only Upon Another
Oh, let's
Game, but
ride that
like,
high. Let's ride that high. I'll give
yeah,
you some
totally.
Spanish leather.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I haven't got a massive amount to say about the song other than I think it's an amazing song. Again, I like his guitar work on it. Obviously, it's about Suze, but not directly because it's it doesn't typical style. It doesn't necessarily invoke. It doesn't say Italy, but it is I'm sailing away my own true love, etc. But again, it's just kind of another heart wrenching song. Like very hard to find any happiness within this album, and um, this has that same kind of one too many mornings of the longing, and like she's going to be back soon and it's going to bring me a present and all this stuff, but it's still like it's still just out of reach, and it's still just a really really good, if not quite sad song.
Well, you know what really strikes me, Dylan was a real person in time and space, living in 1963, experiencing a lot. We've already just listed so many. We talked about Medgar Evers, MLK, um, wars, the assassination of your president. Like, this is crazy stuff. And to be a person living in crazy times and to react to it, all of that's going on. And meanwhile, the woman you love most, your muse, your inspiration, is away from you, and possibly you don't know if she's going to come back. And so that's a painful place to be politically, ideologically, and just like as a person, missing the person that you've just come to know and love over the last year. Like, that's
And
this
they're
this
missing your rise as well. Like there's the other side of that, which is at the same time Dylan's exploding, and that person's also not witnessing that. So he's becoming quite famous, quite rich, alone. Well, not obviously not alone
well, yes,
because
but
we know what happened, but like you know, without presumably the woman he loved. And so what I like about this song and One Too Many Mornings though is it's a very, like you said, a very human moment in this album that's quite apocalyptic in terms of what it's talking about. Like whether you say it's protesting or not, he is still talking about the civil rights movement. He is still talking about um, you know huge societal change and unrest. And then you have these human moments, which is where he stops being Bob Dylan who's looking outwards and starts being a Bob Dylan who's looking inwards, and is missing Suze and is writing these beautiful songs, and it does have this sense of kind of longing and melancholy for her, and it's like a nice, as much as the song's not exactly happy, it's a nice kind of breather on the album. And like you said, it kind of reminds you Dylan's human, and he's still like this young kid who's got like presumably his first real love, and she's not here, and it's just a nice moment, and weirdly a song that he also continued to play up until like the late 2000s. But it never really changed that much in its arrangement. It was still kind of like a nice slowish folk ballad. But again, that's followed him through his entire career. It's kind of odd how these songs, like I've always suspected that he still held like a candle for Suze, and the fact that he
oh,
didn't want her
totally.
name. Yeah, like but he changed it to Sylvie and a complete unknown. Um, and I'm sure as time goes on, these songs do lose some of their meaning. But it is interesting how he still manages to play songs like One Too Many Mornings and Boots of Spanish Leather so many, many years later, in that either he doesn't view Suze in a negative light, which I kind of believe, or I don't know if they just do lose all meaning, but I find it straight. I find it difficult to believe that it would lose all meaning, if you know what I mean. Like, if you
Totally.
wrote it with such heartache.
Well, can you imagine Sue's the first time that she heard it? I mean, because if he hadn't talked, I don't know how much they talked about the songs, but I'm sure she listened to the album for the first time, maybe even with him. And, like, imagine hearing it. Like, you're thinking it is about you, even if it's not, or if it's supposed to be metaphorical. Like,
Yeah, but
in
she
her
asked
mind,
Dylan. He wouldn't say yes, would he?
no.
He'd be a dick about it. The next song as well, I think, is one of the most underrated on the album as well, which is When the Ship Comes In. Famously, Dylan wrote it in like this rage after he almost didn't get admitted to a hotel. He couldn't stay at a hotel when he was with Joan because he was how scruffy he looked, and he went to the room and I wrote this kind of really angry diatribe against. But obviously, it's not necessarily against the owners of a hotel. At no point it says that in the song, but he comes up with these really biblical images of like there's going to be this flood and this storm, and when the ship comes in, you're all going to get your comeuppance all because someone said that he looked like a scruffy fox, which, by the way, he did.
Yeah.
Um, but I just think I really like the anger. I really like the guitar on it again. Um, I even liked it in the scene in A Complete Unknown when he plays it with Pete Seeger. I thought that was quite a good scene. Yeah, I just really, really like the song, and I just think it's kind of underrated in his catalog because it's relatively um kind of short-ish for the album, and it's the one that maybe has the least to say kind of thing. It's a bit more obscure. We're kind of starting to go into territory a little bit of what's to come in
Yeah.
these big, grander ideas and scenes that aren't necessarily rooted in much reality. But I just think it's a really, really good song. Like, can't really much say much more than that. I just like it.
Yeah. No, it's great. I like that he has more biblical characters. That's another thing we talked about on one of the last iterations of the podcast. Like Dylan's use of the Bible, especially before he actually is like a born again believer. Like he's using it almost in mythical ways, which I mean I think that's what he is doing. Um I do like the version that he sings with Joan. Like I love the way that she harmonizes behind him on the live version of this song. And it had me thinking that it actually might be one of my favorite just ever like singular Dylan performances live. So I have a question for you that you're probably not prepared for.
Go for it.
Um, so what is your just like simply your favorite live version of a song from this album? So a song from these 10 tracks,
Oh, from this album.
is there a particular live version that is your absolute favorite that like everyone should go listen to?
Oh man, that is really off the top of my head, isn't it? Can I answer you at the end? Can we go?
Sure. Yeah,
Can
we'll
I
try to come
think
back to it.
about it in the background? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We'll come back to it. There's a
Okay.
couple in my head at the moment, but I want to pick one. But yeah, okay, cool. Right. The next track is A Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. I'll just start whilst I'm thinking, I would just say this is by far my favorite song on the album. But take it from here, Jones.
No, I'm honestly surprised because earlier when you said was it with God on Our Side that was the song that you would often skip. This is that song for me, and it's not because I think it's a bad song. I honestly think it's because like by the time you've gotten here, if you're listening through, like this is a longer album. A lot of these songs, I mean, they clock 5, 7, 6, 5.5 minutes, and for me, I think my steam is just about to run out, and like I don't know, it's just how I've approached the song. But I will say again, Dylan writing about very important, very contemporary, specific issues that maybe don't apply today in the same way, but these types of things still happen. And I think that's, again, an unfortunate reality. Like, how have things not changed or progressed more in the last 60 years?
I've got my answer to your question, by the way.
Okay, go for
If
it.
I answer it now. It's The Times They Are A-Changin when he performed it at the White House in 2010, 2012 maybe. Performed it for Obama. Did this really, really slowed down, incredibly beautiful version. It's on YouTube. I'm sure most people listening to this will have seen it. But that's probably my favorite live. Or it's so that's the first one that came to my head when you asked the question. I then just had a quick look at some others and thought, nah, I'll stick with that. So yeah, Dylan at the Live House, Times Are A-Changin, title track. Hattie Carroll, though, I understand what you mean. Like when you get here, you've been through a slog, and this is not going to make you any happier. And
No.
even though the story of what happened with William Zanzinger, like he tried to he didn't sue Bob, but he tried to. I think, or he said he should have sued Bob because Bob does take certain liberties with the story. However, the facts do remain that William Zanzinger killed Hattie Carroll and murdered her, and then got 6 months for it. And he was the son of a wealthy tobacco farmer or like landowner kind of thing. Um, I just think it's for me just one of the most devastating songs he's ever written. Like that final verse, there's so many quotable lines of, the ladder of the law has no top and no bottom. Stared at the person who killed for no reason, who just happened to be feel that way without warning. Like, and when the way he repeats table like four times in the verse about Hattie Carroll, like describing who she is, I just think it just really hits home. And I remember the first time I heard this, I was kind of how I was with Hollis Brown, but maybe like times 10 of being so stark and being like, what the fuck is this? And then you go and you read it's a real story and you're like, oh God, like humanity's fucked. We're just so fucked. By the way, tick for relevancy on this. And I just think like that the way he delivers at the end, William Zanzinger with a 6 month sentence, and he kind of stalls that a little bit. He kind of leaves a little gap before he hits 6 month sentence, and then you who prophesied fate, and then he says, "Bury the rag deep in your face. Now is the time for your tears." At the end of the song, and then there's like this really mournful harmonica solo that's quite haunting at the very end. And to me, genuinely, this is like one of my favorite ever Dylan songs. Not because I enjoy listening to it, I just think it's so important in
Yeah.
terms of a Dylan story, and also really weird life after this, in that it obviously appears on the Rolling Thunder review, and it's a really really good version, but it's like a quick like rocky version, which is really odd given the story of it. But I really like the Rolling Thunder version as well. I think it's kind of a song that translates because the story is so sad and universal, and everyone kind of has that same gut punch. I've seen people react to it on YouTube. There's twats who just listen to songs and react to them. But
Yeah.
one of them was this, and I was interested, and it was a lot of black people listening to it. Like not on one video, not like loads of different videos of mainly black people listening to this and Hurricane, and the reaction from them is all the same, which is kind of surprised that Bob Dylan's white. And also, when it gets to the 6 month sentence, everyone kind of has the same like look to the camera of like, of fucking course he did. And it's like this weird, like types like tragically timeless story that I think just still hits home 62 years later as it would have done at the time. And again, you've got Dylan who's telling the entire world about this. Like, who knows at the time? I don't think it was a big story. Do you know what I mean?
Probably
Like, it
not.
was
No.
probably fairly commonplace, sadly. And then Dylan puts it on the album, and he's naming names, man. Like, but
Like real people.
When Kendrick and Not Like Us said, "Say Drake, I hear you like I'm young," and people are like, "Oh God, he said Drake by name." It's like that is amazing and hilarious. But Dylan's doing this fucking years ago. He's naming William Zanzinger in Hurricane. He's naming every single person involved. Like, does not give one solitary shit. And
He
so
was
William Zanzinger,
22.
but like William Zanzinger now, for people in the know, like they know who that guy is and they know what he did. And Dylan like really kind of blasted his name out there and said it multiple times and talked about his family and all this stuff. And also people know who Hattie Carroll is because again, Dylan said the victim's name. And so to return to the point about is this a protest album? It's not necessarily like a protest album, but this is a song in which Dylan is clearly telling you that what happened is bad. Obviously, that is wrong. It's the wrong side of history. What has happened is someone has been murdered and not been appropriately sentenced for it due to a racist justice system that's also predicated by the fact that the murderer has rich parents. And so you may say, oh, is he protesting or not? This is a song which he's doing a very clear line in the sand of like, this is what I believe and this is what's happening in America at the moment. And I think it's just so kind of just powerful. Just a fucking just I love it so much.
And we're just getting started. This is again, he's 22 at this point. It's kind of mind-blowing to consider someone so young and so tapped into like the local news, the more broader national news, and to be able to articulate that in a way that I don't know, I couldn't even maybe in conversation, and he's doing it so eloquently in a song. And here we are still talking about it 60 some years later. But I think to touch on the very last song, Restless Farewell, this is like I said, it's almost like Dylan's recognized that where I've been, I can't remain. This feels like both a breakup song to a girlfriend, but also to an idea or perhaps boxes that he's already being put in. Because if you take a look at the order of when these are recorded, he went back to the studio just to record this song. this was after the session had already completed.
So we did an episode of the really old podcast, the Nothing's Revealed, where I posited that the final songs on each album fell into three categories. And one was the farewell, one was the personal, and one was the epic, I think I said, something like that. But anyway, the farewell in terms of a lot of the times at the end of Dylan albums, he seems to shed the skin of that album and move on to the next one. And this is the first example of that, which I think you're entirely correct, which is on the face of it, it sounds like breaking up with a partner, but obviously we know he hadn't actually broken up with Suze. So if we're looking at it from an autobiographical lens, that doesn't make sense. There's also kind of he's talking about friendship groups, but I do think it's the folk movement, which becomes a lot more apparent on another side. And then, when we get to stuff like Baby Blue, which I think is also about the folk movement as opposed to an individual person. And I'll say farewell and not give a damn being at the very end of this is he seems to be already killing the idea of Bob Dylan and moving to the next one. Like you said, he returned
On Halloween.
to yeah, exactly. Maybe he was feeling spooky and thought I'll
Right.
go back in. But it's after oh no, sorry, no. I was gonna say it's after the Tom Paine, but it's not. It's a couple of months away, that isn't it? Sorry. But yeah, no, he's this to me seems a very purposeful final track of you've heard all of this, and then suddenly it seems quite autobiographical about making money and about kind of being put into certain boxes, which he hasn't helped himself with the previous 9 tracks. But then he I don't know, it's almost to me seems like he knew he had a statement to make on this album, but then very intentionally at the end said, and I'm done with that now. Like I've said what I need to say now. And then 62 years later, people still introduce him as a folk singer or a protest singer. So he didn't do an amazing job of shedding that skin. But there seems to be a very purposeful placement of this song, and I've always read it like you said. Of it seems to be him like the idea of a breakup, but it's a breakup with I think a movement or an aspect of his personality or a certain type of song that he now wants to move on from.
Yeah. I'm curious what you think. I mean, he has a line in here that says, "Every girl I've ever hurt, I did not do it knowingly." And I mean, the question I have is that the truth? Or is that what he wants to be true of himself? Like how, you know what I mean? Like we're all humans. We all do like fuck up and shit happens. But it's like this is a one of those moments where I wonder, like, is Dylan being autobiographical or is it more a like something to aspire to?
But again, it sounds like he's writing it from the perspective of this should be at the end of like a 70-year-old's album. Do you know what I mean? Like in terms of looking back at your life again, like how many girls had he hurt at this point? Um, as in emotionally, by the way. I'm
Right,
not talking
right.
about. But like we know he went out with Echo and he's currently with Suze at this time, and presumably cheating with Joan. So like again, you do struggle to fall into this autobiographical thing. I think it's interesting, by the way, that in 1995, Frank Sinatra chose this as the song he wanted Dylan to sing to him at his birthday party. Where if you haven't seen that, go check it out. It's really, really good. Dylan's 1995 voice is was it 94? I said 95 with a hell of a lot of confidence, but it might be 94. But anyway, whenever he does it for Sinatra's birthday party, Sinatra requested this song, and Dylan had
Hmm.
either never played it live or hadn't played it live for certainly 30 years before it. And yeah, the 94, 95 voice is a little bit on the old whiny side. But it's interesting that Dylan had such respect for Sinatra because obviously he loves Sinatra, given the albums he went on to make with Shadows of the Night and Fallen Angels and Triplicate. But he actually kind of pulled this old, very forgotten song in Dylan's kind of catalog. This is an incredibly forgotten song, isn't it? And I've heard people say this is the worst song on the album, which I don't agree with at all.
It's one of my favorites.
No, I agree. I think it's to use. I've described 2 other songs as underrated, but I will also describe this song as underrated. Like I think it's a kind of perfect album closer, especially if you look at the last 2 albums when I actually think both closers were kind of not bad, but like misplaced. Like we said, I Shall Be Free on Freewheeling was the closer, which is a really, really strange choice. Whereas this seems to be a definitive bookend to either Bob Dylan's part of that career, like part of that his career, or at least to this album, it seems to be he's closing the book on the album itself. And I think it's yeah, kind of the perfect album closer. We're about to hit a good run of album closers actually, but this is certainly the start of it.
Agreed. The only other line I wanted to call attention to though was where he says it's for myself and my friends that my stories are sung. And I want that to be autobiographical, like Dylan being honest, like these songs, like if you're wondering what they are, where they come from, what they're for. He says it's basically for like me and my friends. Like this is what I'm singing for, what I'm singing about my people, I guess, just to put it as plainly as possible. And I don't know, I like that line.
Yes, I'm not singing it for kind of the man as it was, or like the movement potentially. Yeah, I think again, it might be might be autobiographical, or it might have shades of himself in, but also mixed with other people. You never know with Dylan, which is kind of part of the fun. But you know, it's purposely been put at the end of the album, hasn't it? We can agree on that, and it's certainly poignantly saying goodbye to something. Whether that something is debatable, but yeah, like I said, I think a perfect album closer.
Agreed. And what do you think of this? This is just 10 songs, which is that's it's quite a few, and granted, some of them are long. But at this point, I'm not comfortable saying that I would want to take any songs off of the album. However, there's like a slew of outtakes that's like, man, what if these could have been on here? Like, could this have been 11 songs? Could this have been 12? So my question to you, of the list that I've provided of outtakes, if we were going to include two more songs, which would you have wanted to be on the album?
Okay, so I'm going to do this based on what's already on the album. So as I've said, I think Percy's song and Seven Curses, which are both amazing songs. If you've got Hollis Brown on there and you've got Hattie Carroll on there, I think that makes the album too depressing. And also they're like quintessential bootleg songs for me, if that's like a nice thing to hear. I will also say my favorite song of the list you provided is Moonshiner, but that's a cover, and this is clearly Dylan not wanting to do covers, so I'm going to exclude Moonshiner as well, even though that's my favorite on the list. I think Farewell. Um, it's kind of hard if you've already got a song called Restless Farewell
But Dylan would be the
on there.
one to do it.
But I mean, Farewell's such an amazing song. When that
Yeah.
play starts in Llewyn Davis at the end, man, that is just
Mm.
again that could easily close the album as well. Um, and I think I'm gonna go with Lay Down Your Weary Tune, maybe. I think as terms of like that's quite a protesty kind of an out there
Hmm.
protesty song, but I think would work quite well with the title track, especially. Um, and it's because you've also written Paths of Victory, which is similarly quite on the nose. Kind of that sounds like a Woody song to me. But just that's my thinking. So I go Lay Down Your Weary Tune and Farewell, to be honest with you.
Okay.
In fact, you know
I
what? It'd be funny if he started the album with Farewell. No, if he ended side one with Farewell, then ended side two with Restless Farewell.
Yes, that would have been the way to do it. And genuinely, I was going to say the exact same songs, and I'm not even joking with you. I like I said, I love Moonshiner. It's one of my favorite songs, but it's a cover, and I think he wanted to move on from doing covers in his work. Um, I love some of the other songs too, but they seem a little bit too cheery or upbeat with the otherwise like more, very dark and heavy album that has been produced here. And maybe that's why historically I haven't liked it. Like this is heavy stuff. Like to have to sit with and actually think about what he's saying. It's
You
hard
don't put
because
this on to
otherwise
sing
like
along with.
right, exactly. Like this isn't an album that like most common people would listen to casually. This is deep and heavy and weighty stuff, and I think maybe why I'm liking it is because it is so applicable to life even now. And it makes me wonder like what can we do so that 60 years from now this isn't still relevant.
I will say as well, by the way, that we did speak about these outtakes at length on the Substack, on the paid subscriber episodes, if you want to check that out. Um, however, I mean, I don't have much else to say about the album, man. Like, firstly, we need to spend less time together if we're choosing the same two songs, because that's weird. That's like a psychic connection across the pond.
Right.
Um, but yeah, like I said, kind of at the top of the episode, this is a top 10 Dylan album for me. I'm glad you seem to have like not necessarily changed your mind, but maybe like kind of appreciated more, seen it in a different light. I'm with you. It's heavy, it's dark, it's not something that I put on the way to work to kind of gear me up for the day. But I just think as a record of importance and of why Bob Dylan is in my mind and your mind and most people listening like the greatest songwriter of all time. Obviously, on Blowing and Free Willing, sorry, we had songs like Blowing in the Wind, Hard Rain, Don't Think Twice, etc. But here, to me, it's just like 10 absolute bangers of this is a guy like we constantly said throughout this episode, 22 years old, wrote and recorded these in a relatively short space of time, and seems to not only be able to turn his eye to what's happening in the world around him, but also turn it back on himself and kind of addresses this human condition that would he would only just go on to do so much more throughout his career. But this is just yeah, to me, it's kind of like the perfect folk album. And obviously, next time we're going to be talking about the last of the quote unquote folk album, certainly for a while. But there are shades of other stuff coming into another side of Bob Dylan, but as a kind of through and through folk album, this for me is the greatest one that's ever been recorded.
I don't know what else to say, man. It's crazy to think contextually that this is, tomorrow is the anniversary of this album, and I think anybody listening should listen intently and maybe walk away with a greater appreciation for just how powerful this album is.
Or you could be scared at how little the world's changed around you.
Or both. Hold both in tension and figure out where to go from there.
But yeah, like I said, we've got Substack. If you guys want to subscribe and hear more of us, next time on the Substack it'll be volume 3 of the bootleg series. Otherwise, in 2 weeks we'll obviously be talking about another side of Bob Dylan. Um, so yeah, be groovy or leave. Yeah, yeah, be groovy or leave. But it took every ounce of kind of like restraint in my body, which is at one point you said when I first came in Bob Dylan.
Oh man.